In this lecture, we're going to talk about wireless LAN or WLAN, which I don't really think I've ever heard anyone call it WLAN. Normally we just say wireless or Wi-Fi. But just in case, the exam uses the terminology, you need to know it. And I think most of us know what a wireless network is. It's just a network that links two or more devices using a wireless distribution method within a geographically limited area. That could be a school, your home, a coffee shop, or the office building you work in. And if configured right, you can move across that entire building, still be connected to the same network, and you should never be able to tell that you switch from one access point to the next and to the next. That said, I think most of us have worked in places where they had Wi-Fi, but there were just some places in the building where either you got a weak signal or no signal at all. If you look at the graphics I did over here on the right, you can see the wireless access points, what they cover, and over on the left, there's one laptop that is outside of coverage. So if that's where Bob needs to work, there's no Ethernet ports he can connect to, well, maybe we want to deploy another access point over there. Most often, a wireless connection would also offer some sort of access to the internet, but they don't always. They might just be for our internal network. We might not want our users to access the internet at all, or we might not want them to access it while they're on the wireless. More than 99.9% of all the wireless we use today is based on IEEE 802.11 standards, and they're all marketed under the Wi-Fi brand. We obviously use Wi-Fi because it's much easier. We can move around and we're always connected. We don't need a cable, but it is also much easier to compromise compared to a cable connection. Now let's look at some of the ways that wireless can be a lot less secure than a cable connection. First off, we have rogue access points. A rogue access point has been added to our network with us not knowing about it, and it is definitely not approved. This could both be attackers, but it could just be internal employees wanting Wi-Fi coverage in an area where there's very little. This could be Bob. He's tired that there's no good coverage in his area. He sets up an access point, and of course, since Bob just brought it from home, it doesn't have the same security posture that our access points would and should. So now, Bob has his wireless, but the attackers also has an easy way to get onto our network. Because Bob is not going to follow our security protocols and our procedures, he's not going to secure that access point. Now, assuming it is the hacker that set up the rogue access point, well then they just name their access point the same that we use for our corporate access points. When our users connect to it, they can sniff all the traffic from those users that are connected to the rogue access point. Now what can we do to mitigate that? Well, the easiest thing we can do is have proper port security on all of our switches. That means whenever Bob plugs a cable into the wall to the RJ45 he has in his cubicle, he connects the other end of the cable to his wireless access point. That should not do anything. That port should first off be shut down and only opened by the networking team whenever one of our team comes out to install whatever equipment they need. The port should also have MAC address sticky, meaning whenever we plug a device in, that MAC address is recorded on that port as the only device that's allowed to access. If any other MAC address is seen, the port shuts down. So if Bob's coworker is out on vacation, they won't be back for 3 weeks, Bob unplugs their networking cable, plugs in his access point, the port should shut down. And yes, I completely know it is super easy to change MAC addresses, but that's not the point. The point is we make it more difficult to do something they shouldn't. Now, assuming we don't, well then, the rogue access points can compromise both our confidentiality and our integrity. Next up, we have jamming or interference. And this is an entirely different attack vector. And it can, just like the rogue access point, be both malicious or not. We could just have an office where there are 50 other access points, all the wireless channels are crowded, and nothing is working. In that case, we can either look for a less crowded channel or, if possible, change frequency. The 2.4 GHz band is very heavily used, whereas the 5 GHz band is a lot more empty. Let's say we are in that office building and there are 50 access points. Some of them ours, some of the people above us, some of the people below us. Well, if both our equipment, wireless access points, and workstations can use the 5 GHz band, and none of the other people do it, well, maybe it's time to switch. And there are many other types of non-malicious interference. I've heard of microwaves or baby monitors or cordless phones. Since many of those use the 2.4 or the 5 GHz band, they can cause interference. Now for the malicious ones. That could just be an attacker sending out a bunch of noise on the frequency and the channel that we use. This is a denial of service attack, and its really only purpose is to disrupt the integrity and the availability of our data. If this happens to us, if we have interference, if the signal drops, well then we would do network analysis to figure out what is it that is interfering with our network. I remember a story from years ago where a company was having a problem with their wireless. The problem was intermittent. It would work fine for hours, and then all of a sudden it would drop. Then 2 minutes, 5 minutes later, it would come back. They couldn't figure out what happened. Countless hours used troubleshooting, and finally, by random coincidence, they realized the wireless access point was close to the microwave. It was a very old microwave. Whenever someone would heat their lunch, that would cause interference. The wireless would drop. Initially, they just moved the wireless point away a little. Still not enough. Whenever people would heat their food, they would lose connectivity. Finally, the solution was very technical. They bought a new microwave. I'm assuming as a very networking-heavy IT security guy, I would assume someone was doing something malicious. But sometimes it's just those weird little things in our environment that makes a difference. In this case, a microwave. An evil twin is taking the rogue access point we just talked about a step further. This is not just an employee wanting the internet to be a bit faster or have more coverage in a certain area. This is an intentional act. Here, the attacker has named their rogue access point the same name as ours, and they have no password. So whenever a device is set to auto-join a network where that name comes into range, and it's the evil twin access point that has the best signal, they will switch to that network. If it is an internal evil twin, it will be connected directly to our network. If you look at the graphics over here on the right, you can see the internal is connected directly to our network, the external is not. But if you look at that overlap between the external twin and the regular network, you can see that computer that is just on the edge of the regular network will have a better signal with the external evil twin, and they will most likely switch to that network. Now, in many cases, if it is an external evil twin, employees will notice that internal resources are all of a sudden not available. But if it is an internal evil twin, well then they're still connected to the corporate network. They will never know. And the same is true here that it is for regular rogue access points. Our confidentiality and integrity will be compromised. We can do scans for the rogue access points and the evil twins. And then, of course, we have proper port security policies. We have the right security posture in place that prevents our internal employees or anyone else not authorized to add access points or anything else to our switches. And with that, we are done with this lecture, and we will finish the coverage of Wi-Fi in the next lecture.